You have $1 billion, you're 35, and you're eating cereal over the kitchen sink at 6:40 inches the morning because that is still the only part of the day that feels like it belongs to you. The wire cleared 11 days ago. 11 zeros. The bowl in your hand cost $4 at a store that sells everything for $4, and you bought it back when the number in your account had a minus sign in front of it. You keep waiting for the feeling to arrive. It doesn't. You read the number again on your phone. Same number, same nothing. You chased this for 17 years, and now it's sitting in an account with your name on it, and you feel exactly the way you felt last Wednesday, which is to say, you feel like a person standing at a sink. Here's what that actually costs. There are two kinds of money. You learned this a long time ago, and it's the reason the account looks the way it does now. Loud money announces itself. It buys the thing that says you've arrived, then bills you quietly every month for the next 5 years for the privilege of saying it. Quiet money does the opposite. It moves before you wake up, it never asks to be seen, and one ordinary Wednesday it crosses a line so large the human nervous system genuinely cannot register it. You built the second kind. You were good at it. You were better at it than almost anyone you'll ever meet. And nobody told you the secret nobody says out loud at the top. The feeling you were chasing was never in the money. It was in the chasing. That's the thing this story is about. Not how you got the billion. You already know how you got it, and so does anyone who's watched this channel for more than a week. This is about the morning after the billion, and the morning after that, and the strange flat quiet that shows up exactly where you expected the fireworks to be. If you're the kind of person who would rather understand that quiet than pretend it doesn't exist, you already know where to subscribe. So let's go back, not to the wire, to the bottom of the ladder where this all started and where the feeling first lied to you. Start at 0. Actually, start below 0, because that's where you were. The screen said -$4, not 400. 4. You were 24, and you remember the exact arithmetic of that month. Rent was due on the 1st. Payday was the 3rd. And the gap between them was a 2-day stretch where you simply did not buy things. You told yourself a story back then, and the story went like this. Once the account holds $10,000, you will finally be able to breathe. That was the number that meant safe. That was the line where the fear was supposed to stop. You remember the texture of that month better than you remember most of last year. The grocery list, written to the dollar. The 47 cents you found in a coat pocket on the second day, and how that 47 cents was, briefly, a kind of wealth. The decision, made standing in a fluorescent aisle on a Wednesday night, that you were going to stop feeling like this, and that the way out was not going to be a bigger paycheck. Priya already had a bigger paycheck. Priya was standing in the same kind of aisle, doing the same kind of arithmetic, one tier up. The way out was going to be the gap. The space between what came in and what left. You decided to widen it and keep widening it, quietly, for as long as it took. That was the first lie, and it was a small one, so you didn't notice it was a lie. Because you did get to 10,000. It took 14 months of moving small amounts on Wednesdays into an account you weren't allowed to touch. And the day the balance crossed 5 figures, you felt it for about an hour. A real, warm, specific hour. Then you woke up the next morning and the number was just the number, and the breath you'd promised yourself had already moved somewhere up the ladder, somewhere with more zeros. The target wasn't 10,000 anymore. It was 100. This is the part everyone misses, so notice it. The feeling didn't come from the amount, it came from the distance closing. And the moment the distance closed, your mind quietly opened a new gap, further out, and pointed you at it. Dylan never understood this. You should talk about Dylan, because Dylan is the reason you can see the whole pattern so clearly. You and Dylan started at roughly the same place. Same kind of job, same kind of paycheck, same negative balance in different months. But Dylan ran the loud version. The first real raise bought a car Dylan couldn't quite afford, financed over 6 years, and for about 3 weeks, Dylan was the richest-looking person in your circle. You watched it happen. The photos, the captions, the version of a life, performed for an audience that was, almost entirely also performing. Dylan got the warm hour too. The difference is, Dylan went looking for it again at the dealership, and again at the watch counter, and again on a beach. Dylan put on a credit card. Same hour, same fade. A new purchase every time the quiet came back, because Dylan had decided the quiet was the enemy. There was a dinner, years in, where Dylan reached for the check before anyone else could, and you understood in that second that the reaching was the whole point, not the meal, the gesture. Dylan needed the table to see the card come out fast, and you let it happen, because by then you'd learned that the most expensive thing in the room is usually the need to be seen paying for it. You had more than Dylan that night by a margin neither of you could have guessed. You ordered the second cheapest thing on the menu and let Dylan be the rich one. You don't announce it. That's the point. Last you heard, Dylan earns more than almost anyone you know and owns nothing that isn't owned by a bank first. The car, the watch, the look, all of it rented. Dylan is one missed paycheck from the edge and has been for a decade. And from the outside, Dylan looks like he won. You went the other way. You kept the $4 bowl. Climb the next rung, the first 100,000. This one took longer than the math says it should have because the early years are slow and boring and nobody films them. There's a number in your head from back then, a specific Wednesday in your late 20s, 9, 2 inches the morning, when an account ticked over 6 figures for the first time and you were standing in a hardware store holding a half-inch plumbing fitting. You looked at the screen, 101,000, and change. And you waited for the wave. You got a ripple, maybe 2 minutes of one. Then a man asked you if you were in line, and you said no, go ahead, and you bought the fitting for $4.70 and drove home with the radio off. By the time you reached the driveway, the 100,000 was just the new floor, and the floor never feels like an achievement. The floor just feels like the ground. The years after that were the ones nobody will ever film, and they are the years that made you. There was no single, dramatic morning. There were about 500 ordinary Wednesdays, each one identical, each one a small transfer into an account you weren't allowed to look at for fun. Somewhere in there you almost broke. There was a watch in a window, $9,000, the kind of object that exists to tell a room you've arrived before you've said a word. And you stood in front of the glass long enough that the man inside started walking toward the door. You did the arithmetic that the watch did not want you to do. $9,000, left where it was, becomes a number with a great many more zeros by the time you're old. You bought 11 quiet years of freedom instead, and you bought them by walking away from a window. Nobody saw you do it. There was nothing to see. That was the point. Priya was around for that stretch, and Priya is the other half of the lesson. Priya out-earned you the entire time. By a lot, near the end. 40,000 a year more. A title you didn't have. A number on a paycheck that made you do a small flinch the one time you saw it. And every December, Priya's account went back to roughly zero, because the money arrived and left through the same door, and the door was always open. Priya wasn't reckless. That's what made it instructive. Priya was responsible, careful even, just always one tier of lifestyle ahead of the income, the way almost everyone is, the way it's designed to feel completely normal. High income, no wealth. The two words don't mean the same thing, and Priya is the proof. You earned less and kept more. That's the whole game, and you played it for years before it paid anything that looked like a reward. You saw Priya one December near the end of that stretch, and it stayed with you. Priya had just gotten a bonus, a real one, the kind that should have closed somebody's gap for good. By the second week of January, it was already spoken for. A nicer lease, a trip already booked, a renovation that had quietly grown a second phase. Priya wasn't lying to anyone, least of all to Priya. The money simply behaved the way loud money always behaves. It arrived, it announced a slightly better life, and it left through the same door it came in. You drove home that night doing a different kind of arithmetic than you'd done at 24, but it produced the same answer. The size of the paycheck was never the thing. The gap was the thing. Priya had a bigger income than you'll probably ever report and a net worth that fit in a coat pocket. And Priya is, to this day, the clearest proof you have that the two are not the same word. Next rung, 10 million. Here's where it gets strange, because by now you'd built the discipline into something automatic, and the number started moving on its own. Compounding does that. It's quiet for a long time, and then it isn't. The first million took most of a decade. The jump from 1 to 10 took a fraction of that, and you barely changed anything about how you lived. Same apartment longer than you needed to keep it. The car you drove until people assumed you were broke, which you found, secretly, a little funny. And 10 million arrived on a Wednesday too, in a boring email with the subject line that summarizes a quarter, no exclamation mark, no champagne, and you noticed something that scared you slightly. You felt less at 10 million than you'd felt at 10,000. Less, not more. The bigger the number got, the smaller the feeling, because the feeling was never scaled to the number. It was scaled to the surprise, and by 10 million, there were no surprises left. You'd done the math. You knew it was coming. The knowing took the last of the warmth out of it. This is the part of the ladder where most people would have stopped, and you should be honest that you thought about it. You had enough. By any sane definition, at 10 million and 31 years old, you had won. You could have turned the engine off. You didn't. And the reason you didn't is the reason this story doesn't have a happy ending in the place you expected one. Mr. Ellis tried to tell you. You should have listened to Mr. Ellis. He was the old man 2 doors down, drove a 15-year-old sedan with a dent in the rear panel he never bothered to fix, mowed his own small lawn on Saturday mornings. You assumed, the way everyone assumed, that he was getting by. He'd worked some unglamorous job for 40 years and retired into a quiet street and a quiet car. It was only much later, after he'd gone, that you found out the man had quietly owned half the buildings on the block and given most of it away, in a will nobody saw coming, including the people in it. A silent millionaire the whole time. The realest version of the thing you were building. You used to see him on those Saturday mornings, pushing the same old mower across the same small lawn, and once you offered to lend him yours, the newer one, and he said no thank you. This one still cuts. It still cuts. You think about that sentence more than you'd admit. The man had the means to never touch a mower again, and he kept the old one because it still did the only thing a mower is for, and the keeping of it was not a sacrifice, it was a preference. He had figured out something you were still 17 years from learning. And the one conversation you actually remember with him, he said something you didn't understand at the time. You'd told him, the way you tell an old man making small talk, that you were working hard, getting somewhere, building something. And he looked at his dented car for a second, and at his lawn for another, and said, the trouble is you'll get there, and then you'll have to figure out what the building was for. You nodded. You didn't hear it. You were 31, and the number was still climbing, and you had absolutely no use for a sentence like that. Climb the last rung, the big one. 100 million came and went without a single photograph. By then, the money was managing itself, the discipline had become identity, and the gaps between targets had collapsed into one long automatic motion. You kept the apartment, you kept the bowl, you kept the habit of bagging your own groceries to save the kid at the register a tip, which made exactly no financial difference, and which you did anyway because it was who you'd become. $100 million, and the loudest thing in your life was still the laundry machine in the basement that took quarters. You don't announce it. That's the point. And then, 11 days ago, on a Wednesday, at 2:47 inches the afternoon, the wire cleared and the number had 10 figures in front of the decimal, and you were sitting in your car in a parking lot you'd been in 1,000 times, and you waited. You waited for the thing, the arrival, the 17 years coming, finally here. This is what it was all for feeling. It didn't come. A car backed out of the spot in front of you. A kid wheeled a cart toward the corral and let go of it too early, and it drifted and clipped the curb. Your phone showed you a number so large your brain refused to hold it, and your body, sitting in a warm car in an ordinary lot on an ordinary Wednesday, felt precisely nothing. Here's what that actually costs, and it's the thing Mr. Ellis tried to hand you for free. The chasing was the life, not the catching. For 17 years, you had a problem, and the problem was clean and solvable, and it gave every single Wednesday a shape. Wake up, close the gap, move the money, watch the distance shrink. The problem was company. The problem was a reason. And the day you finally solved it for good, you didn't get freedom. You got the silence where the problem used to be, and your mind, which had spent 17 years learning exactly one thing, immediately started scanning the horizon for the next gap to close and found nothing and would not stop scanning anyway. That's the part nobody warns you about at the top. The engine doesn't have an off switch. You built it to want, and it still wants. And now there is nothing left to point it at. Dylan's engine wanted things and never had enough money. Your engine had all the money and ran out of things. Different problem. Same restless 6:40 in the morning, standing at a sink, waiting for a feeling that already came and went somewhere around $10,000 and a warm hour you barely noticed. The mornings since the wire have a sameness to them that you weren't prepared for. You wake at the same hour you always have, because the body keeps the schedule the bank account no longer requires. You make the same coffee. You stand at the same window. And for the first time in 17 years, there is no transfer to make, no gap to measure, no distance left to watch close. You keep reaching for the problem the way a tongue reaches for a missing tooth, and the problem isn't there, and the reaching is somehow worse than the work ever was. The work, at least, pointed somewhere. This points nowhere. This is just a very rich person at a window, on an ordinary Wednesday, with an engine running at full speed against nothing. You think about Mr. Ellis and his mower that still cuts? You think you finally understand the sentence he handed you in a driveway a decade ago, the one you nodded at and didn't hear? He wasn't warning you about the money. He was warning you about the morning after the money, the one where the building is finished and you are standing inside it asking what it was for. He'd answered the question for himself somewhere along the way. A lawn, a car that still ran, a will that quietly took care of half a street. He pointed his engine at other people while it still ran, and then he let it slow down, and he was not standing at any sink at 6:40 waiting for anything. You never asked him how he did that. You assumed you'd have time. You assumed the figuring out came automatically with the number, the way the warm hour was supposed to. It doesn't come with the number. Nothing comes with the number. That is the one thing the number cannot buy, and it turns out to be the only thing that was ever in short supply. You don't announce it. That's the point. There's no one to tell and nothing to tell them, because from the outside, you're a person with a $4 bowl, and from the inside, you're a person who reached the end of the only map you ever drew. The number nobody sees is not the 11 zeros in the account. The number nobody sees is the one that measures the distance between the life you built and the reason you were supposed to build it. And on an ordinary Wednesday at 6:40 in the morning, standing at a sink that is still, somehow, the only thing that feels like yours, that distance is the only figure left that you can't quite make yourself read twice. So here's the only question left for you. If the feeling was never in the number, and the number is now as big as a number can get, what do you build on the morning you finally have nothing left to chase? Build it quiet. Nora.